You only need to know me.
I will be the one.
Witless tarnished. Why cover destined death? To kill what?
唐突すぎて頭が追いつかなかったが
Oh, death. Become my blade once more.
失踪さん
Imagine being such a broken character that you die and yet you still survive somehow. In that way, you are undying. You cannot die. You cannot be defeated. Yes, it doesn't make much sense at first. But bear with me because some of the connections I draw in this video will blow your mind. I'll give you a teaser by showing you these 3 characters on the screen. Can you tell what they have in common? If you can see what I see, smash that like button, and if you can't, well, watch the video, like the video, and subscribe to help get the best ZORO theory in the last few years out there by cutting into YouTube's algorithm. Every like is the equivalent of 1 slash. I've said the following before in other videos. I guess that makes this video my magnum opus when it comes to ZORO and what it truly takes to unlock a black blade. It might even be the closest thing we get to a Straw Hat dying. Unless Usopp really does, as some have argued. The greatest theories about Zoro's Black Blade take inspiration from the source material, in canon moments and interviews from Oda that give us a glimpse into not only who Zoro is, but also into who the only 2 people to have attained a Black Blade truly are. How both Mihawk and Ryuma became not just great swordsmen, but both likely the greatest or strongest swordsmen of their respective timelines, challenging countless swordsmen to become the strongest. Surely they struggled and nearly died during some of their battles. Zoro has also fought many on his journey to the present storyline. Zoro has gone through many trials of death, coming close to dying after experiencing hell on multiple occasions. One time was against Kuma telling Zoro he would experience hell, and Zoro nearly died. Who knows if Zoro saw the same Grim Reaper back then as he did recently in chapter 1038, as he was once again on the brink of death after unlocking a power that let him not just conquer and tame Enma, or conquer and defeat King the Wildfire, but also just maybe conquer death itself. Yes, this seems to be a trend, conquering death. It seems that conquering death is a trend in various anime and manga, where those that do come out stronger on the other side. In One Piece, some call it a Haki bloom, your spirit growing stronger the more battles you endure or survive. Yes, conquering, because when Zoro says he will become the king of hell, a king is just another way of describing a conqueror in Oda's story. And so Zoro is really saying he will become the conqueror of hell, hell being the underworld, the land of the dead. And so in other words, Zoro will become the conqueror of death. In chapter 1038, we see Zoro unable to move as death hovers above him in the form of a Grim Reaper. I'm reminded of the concept of sleep paralysis, a feeling of being conscious but unable to move. It occurs when a person passes between stages of wakefulness and sleep. During these transitions, you may be unable to move or speak for a few seconds up to a few minutes. During sleep paralysis, some might have hallucinations and sensations that cause fear, as Zoro is clearly experiencing here. I would even go a step further and argue that Zoro has entered the place between worlds, the place between life and death, on the edge of either. A feeling he experienced against Mr. One when he mentioned the world becoming quiet all around him, his own heart beating loudly like a drum, the boundary between life and death again, the sound of drums. Zoro's beating heart as he nearly died also parallels Luffy's heart beating, like a drum as he almost died, but in a burst of conquerors came back to life as the sun god Nika in Gear 5. In each instance, we are reminded of Kaido's words that death is what completes a person. Death completes your ability. The true power of the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the sun god and warrior of liberation, and maybe the true power of a sword god, the god of the blade, the god of the blade's warrior soul, has passed the test of death. The same test alluded to by Zoro when speaking of not just the weight of his swords, but also how not even the Grim Reaper can take his life away. Not even death can win. Zoro's promise to never lose again includes a promise to not die until he becomes the world's strongest swordsman, to cut anything and defeat anyone, Imagine what would happen if Zoro cut death itself, or allowed death to cut him. It's strange how devil fruits share some relationship with swords. Both have a relationship to dreams and inherited will. Dreams of the past or dreams of the current wielder. The Wado Ichimonji is attached to the dream and will of both Zoro and Kuina, for example. And going back to Luffy, the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the devil fruit of the sun god Nika, seems to be an answer to people's dreams to be free and happy. Devil fruits also contain a spirit or will then that reincarnates and can be placed inside of a new fruit or a host or a human vessel. And if the parallel continues, what happens when the swordsman dies? Where does his spirit go? What if when you die, a part of your spirit stays behind? If collected and imbued into an object over the many years, what if the reason why Zoro said Ryuma's Black Blade Shusui was so heavy is because he had been pouring a part of himself, Ryuma that is, had been pouring a part of himself, if not all that he was, into his sword over the many years, such that his essence remained long after he was dead, in the blackness of the Black Blade Shusui, heavy as if it were a man, a human, not merely a sword being held in Zoro's hand. The same might be true of Mihawk's Black Blade named Yoru. The name Yoru translates to night, and so Mihawk's Black Blade is a sword as black as night. The weight of this Black Blade is probably incredibly heavy. The weight, the lived experiences, the blood, sweat, and tears poured into it heavier than anything Zoro has ever faced. The weight of Mihawk's warrior soul, it too will remain black as a black blade, long after Mihawk has been defeated and is dead and gone, because Mihawk's life or spirit has in many ways become the blade. The blade is him, just as surely as the blade can be seen as me, or you. For those of you that get the reference, Ryuma had become Shusui, Mihawk is Yoru. One cannot be defeated without defeating the other. Scars on the back bring shame to a swordsman. Maybe this is why Shanks, Roger, and Whitebeard don't have black blades, because they didn't care. Their injuries, especially in the case of Shanks and Whitebeard, should be noted. Scars on the back bring shame to a swordsman. And Mihawk's training of Zoro in arm and haki, as a foreshadowing of black blades, teaches us that any chip or damage to your sword brings a similar shame as if your own body had been damaged. Almost as if the same standard you hold yourself to must be held to your sword. You and the sword are one. Both must be unbreakable, without blemish. Both must be undying. So you probably caught on to a choice of words I keep using. Undying. What if I were to tell you that either Zoro must die, kind of, to finally join the ranks of the undying, or at the very least, this is how Oda has portrayed Zoro throughout the story. Again, the trials of death. How Zoro keeps coming so close to death that at this point I feel like cheering him on. Come on, Zoro. You can do it. Just die already. Okay, that's a little too dark for a One Piece video. But based on this mind-blowing theory, I think rooting for Zoro to die is entirely appropriate. Because death is not the end. Death is what completes a person in this fictional setting. And so let's go back to that image that I showed you at the beginning. What do these three have in common? Dracula Mihawk, Shimatsuki Ryuma, and Roronoa Zoro. Two have black blades. One will eventually acquire a black blade as well. That's obvious. As is the eventual shared title of the world's strongest swordsman. If Ryuma once had the same title since he was regarded as the man with the world's greatest warrior's soul during his era. But when we first meet Dracula Mihawk, his description as a shadowy figure preying on mere mortals by comparison, pirates far weaker than him. It very much fits his character inspiration, which we believe to be Count Dracula, appearing alone, a dark legend, traversing the darkness of the sea, alone, like a vampire rising from its coffin, hunting unsuspecting prey. Dracula Mihawk craving battle instead of human blood. And when we first meet Ryuma, he is a zombie that cannot rest until he is defeated. And so, what do Dracula Mihawk and Ryuma have further in common? The undead. They are undying. Their legend and their existence based on their portrayal. Undead, undying, undefeated, the world's strongest. Vampires are known as Nosferatu, the undead. It means they have died but then were repossessed by evil or a curse and now move around preying on the living. Sounds like someone taken over by the curse of their sword. Again, you are or you become the blade. We are told by Kozaburo that only weak people view the power of their blade and its effect on them as a curse. And this is best evidenced in the story by Cavendish struggling for control of Hakuba. The same eyes as Mihawk indicate someone that is strong enough to control their blade's will. But when taken over by the blade is seen as cursed, and so are you. Even if you can bond with the blade, its power might be feared by others as a curse. And as for those with similar eyes, which might be relevant because I know that some eyes are just a design choice by Oda, but I do feel there might be a reason for them in other cases. In a way, Cavendish is cursed to sleep, walk forever, becoming possessed by Hakuba whenever he falls asleep. Zunisha is cursed to roam, or walk the seas forever until a certain day comes. And so what if Dracula Mihawk is cursed to walk or roam the seas forever alone, to live forever until he finds a strong enough opponent, a man that is worthy or strong enough to defeat him? The burden that he carries as exemplified by the cross on his back, no different than the burden carried by Christ. Even the Undying can die though, as strange as that sounds. Even the Undying can be put to rest. A person also dies before coming back to life as a zombie, like Ryuma. In this way, death has been conquered. You were dying, you died, and you came back. You overcame and conquered death. Can a blade cut through death? What if this question is one that Zoro has or will eventually ask? Or is a black blade death itself?
Witless tarnished. Why cover destined death? To kill what?
放出し続けるなんて命取りだ。
Oh, death. Become my blade once more.
There's a game called Elden Ring, and in that game there's a character called Malekith, the Black Blade. Yes, you heard that right, and probably know where this is going. Malekith, the Black Blade, says the following after being nearly defeated. O death, become my blade once more. O death, become my blade once more. Death becomes his blade. And then this guy, this scrub-looking character, kind of homeless, turns into a total beast after death becomes his blade. And his sword turns black in the process. A connection is drawn here between a black blade and death. A blade of death, or a sword born from death. A sword born from battle, from cutting or killing and spilling the blood of many, or from having your own blood spilt countless times and nearly dying. And so the connection to death that the vampire Mihawk and the zombie Ryuma are hinted at having. The undead are undying, immortal, unbreakable, like a black blade. And so an undying body and an unbreakable sword. Death seems to be the key. The spirit becomes complete then, as will Zoro's warrior soul. This might explain the green aura surrounding Zoro's blades, as this aura looks different than the advanced conquerors that also coats his blades. The green aura looks like Zoro's soul, since he is mosshead and has green hair. Zoro's soul pouring into the sword. A hint at the permanence of the spirit in a black blade that I mentioned earlier, that even after the creator of a black blade dies, the blackness remains. Even though Zoro was no longer holding Enma against King the Wildfire, Zoro's haki remained surrounding the sword. Almost like the two had bonded, a spiritual connection had been formed. Zoro had poured his very life into the blade, and for it to become black, maybe death is required. Maybe Zoro must give his entire life to the blade, truly encapsulating the saying by many greats, when asked how badly do they want it to be the greatest, are they willing to die for it? The Grim Reaper that Zoro saw after defeating King, the outcome of the vision was hidden for a reason. Another encounter will take us back to it in the future, I believe, as a flashback, most likely. But did Zoro defeat death, or did he run away? Did Zoro get lost? I think the answer to this holds the answer to a black blade. Perhaps Zoro is seeing the Reaper now because it's the closest Zoro has ever come in the story to dying, which says a lot when compared to his nothing happened moment during Thriller Bark. Or maybe Zoro saw the Grim Reaper at that time too, but just doesn't remember. The Grim Reaper is known as Thanatos, better known as the personification, embodiment, and spirit of death. He is known throughout the cosmos for appearing soon after someone has died to deliver their soul to the afterlife. It would appear that the Grim Reaper failed to kill Zoro, Zoro did not lose. Zoro remains undying, but he hasn't yet defeated death because death continues to visit him. How all of this ties into unlocking a black blade, the link between the strength of your spirit and the strength of your blade, death and black blades, the meaning of a true conqueror, is further supported by the following ideas. For one, when Zoro first fights Mihawk, we see that it doesn't appear to matter what blade you are fighting with, be it a big or small knife. The number of blades, the skill of the swordsman comes first. Give the strongest sword to the weakest man, and the weakest sword to the strongest man. The strongest man will win, because it is not the sword that makes him great. He is great. He is the sword. When it comes to conquering death, rather than running away from death, we see Zoro run head-on towards it. Zoro refuses to run away from Mihawk's tiny blade that is pointed at his heart, which led Mihawk to acknowledge Zoro's spirit, maybe a foreshadowing of things to come. Don't run from death, Zoro. Embrace it. Although this does seem to contradict Mihawk telling Zoro after cutting him down that it was too soon for him to die, as if to hint at it being both too soon for Zoro to die literally, too soon for Zoro's journey to end there, but also too soon for Zoro to die and unlock a black blade. He's not yet ready. The same appears to be true after Wano. Zoro was not ready to face the Grim Reaper. Mihawk appraising Zoro's spirit on the verge of death might further support the idea of death and the spirit becoming your blade, you becoming the blade in that sense. That your spirit becomes the blade when you die. That is the secret of a black blade. O death, become my blade. O spirit, become my blade. When you think of Zoro cutting anything, even, it's not like his sword or a black blade can cut anything on its own. Rather, it is the swordsman that can cut anything, and so the spirit that can cut anything. And so, if a black blade is you, the spirit manifests as a sword, then it is your spirit that can cut anything. The blade is you. You are the one doing the cutting. And another surprising connection will be drawn between this quote from Bleach and the blackness of the blade that is relevant to it later in the video. This connection between a blade and death is reinforced by the sword Enma. The name Enma refers to Enma, who is often called Yama and is the god of hell in the Buddhist religion. Enma is the god who judges whether the souls of people go to heaven or hell. Generally, Enma is regarded as a deity and or personification of death, just like the Grim Reaper. Zoro conquered Enma, the god of hell. It seems like he must also conquer the Grim Reaper, the god of death, or death itself. If Enma is the god who judges whether the souls of people go to heaven or hell, then Enma is still judging whether Zoro is worthy to turn that blade black, heaven or hell. Will you rise or die? Zoro then is being judged by death. Some other ideas pertaining to a black blade are more historical and take inspiration from other literature and media. In Japanese culture, the black blade is considered to be a rare Japanese katana, believed to be used by persons with a divine connection, a godly connection. Gods, and so the god of the blade or sword god. Gods exist beyond this life, and so death seems a fitting passage of entry. The expression from Elden Ring about death becoming your blade. We see something similar in the story about the wizard Merlin and King Arthur, where the black blade also makes an appearance. It is instead called the Ebony Blade, and it was wielded by Sir Percy of Scandia, an athletic man with no superhuman powers. He was a master of swordsmanship, a knight of the Round Table, a man known as King Arthur Pendragon's greatest warrior, and therefore he had the greatest warrior soul. The Ebony Blade of the Black Knight is said to have been forged by the wizard Merlin from a meteorite. This blacker ebony blade made the Black Knight Percy invincible against physical damage as long as he held the Ebony Blade. Unbreakable, undying. It is said that Sir Percy, the Black Knight, is eventually defeated and killed by someone else that is wielding an ebony blade. It seems as if only someone with an ebony blade could defeat another with an ebony blade. A black blade is needed to defeat a black blade. Perhaps the expression of "O death, become my blade." Sir Percy, the ebony blade of Sir Percy, was said to have acquired a curse due to all the blood that the blade had shed. And apparently there is a point at which Sir Percy's spirit possesses the ebony or black blade itself. This now takes us to the concept of the blade is me. From what I remember, Ichigo was a Shinigami, or Soul Reaper, and his main weapon, a blade, was known as a Zanpakuto. Considering the Bankai ability, Bankai, also known as Final Release, is the second and final upgraded form of Zanpakuto, kind of like increasing the grade of a sword by forging it into or turning it into a black blade. To achieve Bankai, one must be able to materialize and subjugate their Zanpakuto spirit, the soul or will belonging to the blade. Only the strongest Shinigami, or Soul Reapers, can use it, and it is the ultimate technique or form of a Zanpakuto, drawing parallels to black blades as the ultimate form of a blade in One Piece, one which only the strongest swordsman can achieve or wield successfully. Unlocking Bankai typically takes many years to achieve via regular means, just as unlocking a black blade was said to be possible for those such as Ryuma only after undergoing many battles and soaking his sword in blood. We talked about a blade testing its wielder, and it appears that a Bankai is known for withholding power, a Bankai's form and strength being determined by how much the spirit recognizes its wielder. If the Zanpakuto does not fully recognize its wielder, then it may not give its Bankai's true name. So when Zoro says, "The blade is testing me," and allows Enma to consume him fully, his haki in its entirety in his fight against King, rather than withholding power from the blade, this might be why. It's also interesting that Ryuma was known as a sword god or god of the blade, likely a title given to those with a black blade. There is a character from Bleach named Oetsu Nemaya, who is a member of the Royal Guard, and he holds the following title: God of the Sword, or God of the Blade. A quote from Oetsu stands out to me. "You've used your Zanpakuto as tools, treated them like subordinates, relied on them like partners, as family, as friends, role models, students, pets, acquaintances, sweethearts, lovers. You're looking at things completely the wrong way. Which is superior, the Zanpakuto or the Shinigami? Let's think about that to start with. Yeah, determining which is superior, who wields who, the blade or Zoro. Is the blade you, or are you the blade? Asking this question might be the key to unlocking his new power. And there is another quote from Bleach I want to consider, and it comes from Zangetsu himself, better known as White Ichigo and Hollow Ichigo, a figure that acts as the manifestation of Ichigo's Zanpakuto, an antagonist that he briefly has to fight and overcome. Zangetsu says to Ichigo, "What's the difference between a king and his horse? If their form, ability, and power were exactly the same, why is it that one becomes the king and controls the battle, while the other becomes the horse and carries the king?" There's only one answer: instinct. In order for identical beings to get stronger and gain the power they need to become king, they must search for more battles and power. They thirst for battle, and live to mercilessly crush, shred, and slice their enemies. Deep, deep within our body lies the honed instinct to kill and slaughter our enemies. But you don't have that. You don't have those pure, base instincts. You're thinking too much. You fight with your brain. You try to defeat your enemies with logic, and it doesn't work. You're trying to cut them with a sheathed sword. That's why you're weaker than me, Ichigo. First, Zangetsu's words about becoming king, searching for more battles and power, once again takes us back to Ryuma, and his many battles that ultimately resulted in a black blade, and how Ryuma was also known as the king, as the world's strongest perhaps. But also what Zangetsu is basically saying is you must metaphorically unsheathe your sword and accept the duty of the blade, what it was made for, as Kozaburo said. Stop holding back. Zangetsu mentioning a thirst to mercilessly crush, shred, and slice their enemies. The instinct to kill and slaughter your enemies that lies deep within. In the case of Enma, Kozaburo having said that swords have a purpose, mainly as tools for taking lives, created to kill. That is why they are designed. Each sword has its own personality that the swordsman must learn in order to overcome it. This violent nature or tendency of some blades, as if death itself had become the blade, makes them scary to some to the point that they are called cursed. But the sword is scary simply because it's performing the role that it was made for. Kozaburo then tells us that Enma is such a blade, and because of havoc and the death it wrought, it was given the name of the King of the Underworld. To unsheathe Enma then, to become stronger than the blade you wield, to master it, so that you are its rider. The blade is your horse. On the subject of death becoming your blade, or a black blade being born from death, there is another scene where Ichigo is fighting against Zangetsu, and much to Zangetsu's surprise, Ichigo lets go of his blade and allows himself to be stabbed. The spirit praises Ichigo for realizing that the only way to acquire the secret of Saigo no Getsuga Tensho, the final form of his blade, is by accepting his blade. This has me wondering whether the apparition of the Grim Reaper before Zoro is actually death, and if that in some way relates to the new power Zoro will awaken, that you have to be willing to die first. You cannot stand in the doorway between worlds forever. Zoro must finally cross over to the other side. Or instead of that, maybe accepting the blade is what a black blade signifies. The swordsman and the blade having become one in spirit and purpose. Maybe this is something that only happens to the swordsmen when they die, or overcome death to become undying and unbreakable as they envision their sword to be. As Kaido said about awakening, where the mind, body, and spirit are aligned. The body, mind, and spirit of a swordsman must become as invincible as a black blade. Ichigo allowing himself to be stabbed to unlock his Saigo no Getsuga Tensho, or final Getsuga Tensho. Hopefully it doesn't spoil some of you that have not watched Bleach yet, but Ichigo said at one point that, in this final Getsuga Tensho, I myself become the Getsuga. If I use this technique, then I will lose all my powers as a Shinigami. That's what I mean by final, as if akin to dying. When Ichigo transforms, he assumes a black form and is coated in a black aura, or energy, as his hair even turns black. This is described as Ichigo's true self, fusing completely with his blade. And even his final attack, Mugetsu, is described as generating a blade of deep, black spiritual pressure, or energy in his hand. So for One Piece, think of it as a deep black haki. What some consider to be the permanent coating or infusion of your spirit or haki into a blade. In Ichigo's case, his own spirit seems to have become a blade. Maybe that's what black blades are. Black blades are you. Another thing that ties into Zoro is how Zangetsu, after stabbing Ichigo, asks if he remembers earlier in the battle when he said what Ichigo wanted to protect was not what he wanted to protect, stating what he wants to protect is Ichigo. But this concept of protecting goes deeper than that. Ichigo himself once said, "If fate is a millstone, then we are the grist, the grain that is ground to make flour. There is nothing we can do against fate as we are. So I wish for strength. If I cannot protect those I care about from the wheel, then give me a strong blade and enough strength to shatter fate." Ichigo's name is said to mean to protect one thing. He was told this by his dad as a child, and after he thinks to himself how he wants to protect his mother. Protecting others is a big theme surrounding Ichigo. Zoro also craves strength for this reason, even willing to throw away his pride for it. Essentially, Kuina's dream is his own. Protecting her dream and his Captain Luffy's dream is also important. Zoro can't become the world's strongest swordsman otherwise. He desires strength to not merely achieve this title, to not merely ensure his name reaches heaven. He also wants strength to protect his crew, his Nakama, his captain's life. Against Mr. One, we see this again, via a flashback with Zoro's master from the East Blue Dojo, who told him that the strongest sword is a blade that can cut what it wishes to cut, but also protect what it wishes or wills itself to protect. A blade that cuts whatever it touches cannot be considered a sword, and some have pointed out the contradiction in philosophy between Kozaburo and Koshiro. Kozaburo embracing the violence of the blade, whereas Koshiro suggests an alternative path. The question is, which one will Zoro decide upon, or will he find a balance between each approach, or chart his own path? After all, a sword that can protect nothing is no sword at all, and sometimes you will have to cut things down, anything and everything around you, even death, to protect that which is dear to you. A young Zoro seeming to agree with Kozaburo rather than Koshiro in this panel here. To end out the video, dying or cutting down death, either way to become undying is what Oda seems to have in mind for Zoro. Dracula Mihawk as the undead vampire Dracula, Ryuma as an undead zombie. Vampires and zombies are said to be cursed and very hard to kill. They in that way refuse to die, even though it's because they simply can't die unless special measures are taken. Vampires are considered immortal, and the expression undead or undying is linked to revival after death, rising nightly from their graves or coffins. This image can be seen as symbolic, a metaphor for one that has conquered or defeated death. Just as the crucifix depicts the cross that Jesus Christ was killed or crucified on, the crucifix is the symbol of Christianity and of the death and resurrection of Christ thereafter. Death is the sacrifice, then, that you have to make to become divine, to become holy, to reach heaven. Specifically in the Bible, when it says that Jesus Christ conquered death, some provide the following explanation. The conquering of death refers to his resurrection. He who was dead is now alive. All of this might hold true for Dracula Mihawk, Dracula, the undead, the undying, Ryuma, the god of the blade, who was turned into an undead zombie and so risen from the dead, and now ZORO, who once claimed even the Grim Reaper. Death itself cannot take his life away. Aside from overcoming death, what they all have in common is a black blade. The last thing that I wanted to mention before exiting the video is the following. Consider it some bonus footage, some bonus ideas for those of you that made it to the end of the video. But when we first meet ZORO, he has been captured and tied up to a wooden post. I point this out because it is no different than Dracula Mihawk carrying a black blade, a sword on his back that is shaped like a cross, the cross Jesus Christ was crucified on. And so what is Oda saying here? How does this tie into conquering death? Because as I mentioned earlier, Jesus was said to have conquered death. Crucifixion is a method of capital punishment in which the victim is tied or nailed to a large wooden cross or beam and left to hang until eventual death. It was used as a punishment by the Persians, Carthaginians, and Romans, among others. To be crucified with Christ is a willing act, it is said. One thing we must remember about Christ being crucified, though, is that he was willing to do it. He said so himself. The reason my Father loves me, Jesus said, is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father, God. And so, what we can conclude from this is you must be willing to die. The second aspect of being crucified with Christ is you are living to die. While we will all die physically one day, this is a different type of death. This is a death of surrender and submission. When Jesus was crucified, he was surrendering his will and submitting to the will of the Father, the will of God. This might be the hardest part of walking with Jesus, learning to crucify your will and taking up his. Surrendering means you give up what you want and trust what God wants is better for you. Maybe this is true for the God of the Blade. To be crucified with Christ means you are willing to surrender your whole life even though you are only sure of the next step. And sometimes you are not even sure of that. This is living to die, and you must do this daily. You must resist the temptation to lay down your cross and go another way, because in all honesty, there is no other way. This information comes from biblical scholars online, and it fits Dracula Mihawk perfectly, who always carries his cross and is living to die, to one day be defeated by ZORO, for ZORO to slay the vampire, to kill an undefeated man, the world's strongest swordsman. In that way, ZORO too is living to die, but like Christ, his own death might lead to a resurrection and the formation of a black blade. But as usual, we will have to wait and see. Don't forget to like the video, comment with your thoughts below, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Also click the notification bell, and make sure to subscribe to that second One Piece channel that will be in the description box and maybe pinned in the comment section as well as here on the screen. As always, there is more to come. Until next time.
Says, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
気のねえ奴はいねえ。